Our guest on Sports Overtime is Lynn Henning of the Detroit News, one of the best baseball writers in the business and the first person I read when I want to know what's going on with the Tigers and in baseball. Lynn, thanks for joining us. You've lived through baseball work stoppages. Should fans be ready for a prolonged lockout here?
They should, and they are. I think, Jackson, I'll tell you, since last autumn, I always thought this thing was probably going to cost them games well into April. And now I think that's clearly the case. The question is, how many into April? I always thought they might lose about 3 weeks. But because of the simple stack up and complexity of these issues and the distance between the two sides, I never saw any resolution happening, certainly before March. And now that's unfortunately the case.
Is there one side to blame more than the other, or do both sides share in this, Lynn?
It's a negotiation between two entrenched sides who both feel like they have economic principle on their side, Jack, and that always is going to, I think, trigger something that is going to be prolonged and extended. And it's not necessarily so much right or wrong as much as it's a belief on the parts of two people that there is justice for what they particularly are asking for in these negotiations with this new collective bargaining agreement. They both feel they're economically on the right side. And to some extent, I suppose the referees would say yes and no and no. I think with the owners, they are trying to protect the smaller clubs against having to try to compete with the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Red Sox, et cetera. And they can't compete, but that's for them to work out. No one's holding a gun to these players' heads when other teams come courting. And the players, conversely, are saying, yeah, well, the guys at the very top are doing pretty darn well. But we've got a whole middle class here. And more importantly, we've got a lot of young players who are not being compensated really in any kind of equitable way. So that's where the rubber hits the road here between the two sides.
Lynn, is it hyperbole to say the game's in danger, the long-term future, or do you think fans will come back like they always have?
I think a lot of that gets overstated. I'm not dismissing those who say I'm done with baseball, no more of these things. But I think we have to remember, Jack, it's been 27 years since they had any kind of a work stoppage. And that's once a generation. To me, when you've got collective bargaining and negotiations going on between two sides at one table on this level, it's probably a wonder that you don't have more work stoppages. But this one had been piling up for a while. The players took it really on the chin in the last two CBAs, and this time they were going to get some ground back. I think that's the fair call. The owners have a different view there, clearly, which is why we're at an impasse.
All right, let's talk Tigers now, Lynn. They made a big step in the right direction last year. If baseball is played, what excites you most about this team?
Not only because they took such a big stride last year toward becoming competitive, but because they've now transformed that up the middle drivetrain. They've got a brand new shortstop here who's going to make a big difference in Javier Baez. They've got Tucker Barnhart now at catcher, who's going to be a major improvement defensively. And they're going to have Riley Green, I'm sure, Jack, in center field on opening day. And this kid is the next big talent to hit town. Now, he's backed up here by Spencer Torkelson, who's going to be at first base probably by June at the very latest and could make the team out of camp. I don't think you sell either one of those short. But when you look at Riley Green in center, when you look at Javier Baez at short, Barnhart now catching, and the help that they got from the corners, both in the infield and outfield last year, and with the pitching staff that they're steadily assembling here with the kids, this is a team that, even though 500 isn't the loftiest peak to really shoot for this year, this is a team that's getting competitive very quickly and is not all that far from being sniffed at as far as a playoff contender.
Yeah, we saw Torkelson here in West Michigan last year. A slow start, but then he went on to hit 30 homers in 3 different levels. Riley Green showing signs of becoming, like you said, a real top-tier player. What has taken so long for the Tigers to develop I know these guys were really high picks, Lynn, but we've seen very few, prospects come through the system and become stars in the big leagues.
One of the problems, and this is why this was going to be a big rebuild, is they had completely denuded the farm system before this reconstruction began. Then you had a bunch of older players who you couldn't really trade. The market had so changed by 2017, you couldn't trade the Victor Martinez's or even the J.D. Martinez's, who should have brought a boatload in an earlier era would have. So you've got all this dead wood on the team, Jack. You've got a very tough payroll situation where they had so far overspent their means that they were paying luxury tax 5 years ago. People forget that. They were up there with a Yankees-Dodgers payroll in a last-place team. That, though, did beget those first overall draft picks, or the first 2 or 3 or 5 in the case of Riley Green and Torkelson and Casey Mize and these guys who are now making the big difference. Jackson Jobe is going to be another one you're going to see. So I think they've done a reasonably effective job with the farm system, which now has talent at all 4 levels, and you're going to see a lot of it at West Michigan this year. But it was going to be a long haul and a long slog. This is kind of the timeline that I saw all along, Jack. I didn't think it would be till 2022 that really they would be anywhere close to what you might call a reasonably talented or skilled team. They're getting there now. But it's been tough. And also, I didn't think they were going to be able to spend much money till about now, because I didn't think it was going to make a lot of sense until they got something of a foundation in there. Well, that's what they gradually were able to assemble after they did the demolition. And now they're pretty much, I think, on the timetable that I saw even 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Tigers seem to have put training wheels on Casey Mize last year. Now, once they're playing again, do you think they'll let him stretch out a little bit, pitch deeper into games? At what point do they let him become an ace?
Sure, they'll do that with Skubal and with Matt Manning as well. They're always going to be into incremental gains with those guys with innings, and they've got to be to protect those young arms. But I think, too, Jackson Jobe has a chance, Jack. I think you could see him in that rotation as early as next spring. Remember, Rick Porcello made it 2 years out of high school, and Jackson Jobe is a whole lot more talented than Rick Porcello. So they are assembling an awful lot of pieces here. But we all know baseball is cruel. It's unforgiving. You need a ton of talent on all sides. And at least over these last 2 years here, the last 2 preseasons, I think you've seen an awful lot of important pieces being added to the mix. And it's going to be, once they begin to play ball, an entertaining ball team. There's no question about that.
Well, I know I'm looking forward to it. Lynn, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Always love your insight, and just can't wait to see baseball again.
As well, Jack. Enjoyed the conversation. Thanks.